my name is Kayla and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. This video is going to be like my February wrap up. I actually read a lot of books. Like 4 of them were kind of like short, so, and then like another 4 were audiobooks, 4 or 5. But yeah, and you know, like normally I'd be like, oh my god, I read so many books, but unfortunately this month it was kind of like a negative sign of how my life and mental health were going. So yeah, so I guess I'll mention it, and if I don't want to actually talk about it, I can cut it out. But today I'm filming this on March 1st, and last Friday the 24th, my cat, who I'd mentioned a little bit was sick or whatever, she passed away. We had like a vet come to the house and put her down and all that stuff, and it's been really hard, and it was a hard couple weeks before that. So yeah, I didn't really know if I was gonna end up actually filming anything, but I think in some ways like doing something that feels normal is good. So I will maybe like put like a picture or a couple pictures of her here, because she was the most beautiful cat who ever lived, and everyone should see her and be like, oh my god, look at her. Anyway, 11 books. I feel like I usually talk about them in like date order, like when I read them, but I think this time I might start with 2 books that like are kind of related and that I also like didn't rate because I didn't know how to. So the first and last book I read of this month were by Leigh Bardugo. The first one was The Language of Thorns, Midnight Tales, and Dangerous Magic, and then the last one was The Lives of Saints. Language of Thorns is basically like a bunch of kind of like myths, fairy tales, all that kind of stuff from the Grishaverse. So I believe there's 6 stories that like each one is kind of from a different part of the world, like Ravka, Catherynne, etc. A lot of them are kind of twists on stories we know. Like one was a little Nutcracker-esque, or that other story. And then my favorite was kind of almost like an Ursula prequel from Fjerda, which I really loved, and that was I think the longest, and it was just like the way that the illustrations were blended in, and just obviously I really love Leigh Bardugo's writing. It was just really fun to like read these kind of like myths and folklore and stuff. It gives you this deeper look into the culture of the Grishaverse. I know it's like a fake place, but like it's real to me. And then The Lives of Saints, these were both library books, so that's why I don't have The Language of Thorns. But The Lives of Saints is actually a book that is in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and I think it's on the TV show too. That is basically kind of like a bunch of little like stories about the miracles and the martyrdoms and all that kind of things of the saints, which a lot of their religion in the Grishaverse is based around saints. So yeah, it just tells, it was like kind of like almost a cross between like a children's Bible and like a bedtime story kind of feel. It was just very cozy and definitely what I needed. So yeah, they're great. Had a great time with those, but I have no idea how to rate them because it's like fairy tales. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like the shorter the book is, the harder time I have like rating it. Am I new to speaking? Anyway, yeah. So other than those, I will do it like in the order I read them. This is actually like a really good reading month. I didn't have anything. I think my lowest rating is like a 3.5. which is awesome. So the first book I read after that, obviously, was Comfort Me with Apples by Catherynne Valente, and I've never read anything by her. I think she wrote like young adult books, but I've never read those. And it's basically, it's a short book, so I can't really talk about it because it will be very spoilery, but basically the premise is about this woman, Sophia, who like, she lives in this little community and her whole life is perfect and she has this perfect husband and she was made for him and all this kind of stuff. But then one day she kind of starts discovering some things that like don't feel so perfect, and kind of this whole idea she has around what her perfect life is starts to unravel, and she's like, but I was made for my husband and everything's perfect and everyone in this world is kind of in this like little community is kind of like, don't question this, just enjoy what you have, like isn't this amazing, your husband loves you so much, like wow. And so it's just kind of about that, and yeah, it was really interesting. I didn't know really where it was going exactly. I was getting kind of like Stepford Wives kind of vibes, but I wasn't sure where it was going to go from there. But yeah, I definitely recommend it, and it's, I mean, like 200 pages, so it's so easy to read. And her writing is really good. Then after that, I finished Sad Cypress by Agatha Christie, which was the Read Christie book for January that I hadn't quite finished. I finished it on like February 3rd or whatever. And I ended up rating it 4 stars, which was kind of surprising because like it took me a little bit to get into it. I was like, is this going to be like a 3-star? But it ended up turning around. Basically follows this young woman named Eleanor Carlisle, who she is on trial for the murder of Mary Gerard, and basically like she's kind of the lead suspect because her ex-fiance was in love with Mary Gerard, and that was kind of one of the factors why they like split up. So it's like, oh, like a jilted lover jealousy kind of thing or whatever, but obviously there's so much more going on there. The beginning is like the first half of the book, Poirot's not in it, but then the second half he is involved in the investigation, and I feel like it really picked up, and I really loved it because I felt like it kind of laid the breadcrumbs for the final solution really well. And I was like surprised, but I was also like, oh my god, of course, like I had thought that earlier, but like it kind of like tricked me into like thinking I was wrong. And that is my favorite. Like Christie is so good at that. Like you're like halfway through the book you're like, I've got it, and then like she spends the next like 100 pages like convincing you that you were out of your mind, absolutely wrong, and then at the end so often the solution is part of what you figured out, and like generally even then you only figured out like a little bit of it. I haven't, other than Death on the Nile, I have not solved a whole crime before, and we don't count Death on the Nile because I solved that crime before it happened. Whatever, Death on the Nile, my enemy forever. Anyway, okay, now I have to talk about what is probably going to be my favorite book of the year. I would be shocked if I read anything better than this. And it was on a lot of people's favorite lists of last year, so, but I rated it 5 stars, Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I don't know how to talk about this because I read it right at the exact right time for me in that book. So basically it's kind of like a dual timeline novel that follows a married couple, Leah and Mary, who like, Leah is a marine biologist, and her chapters follow her on this like deep sea submarine mission that like goes horribly wrong, and they are stuck in the ocean for 6 months. And then Mary's chapters like follow her 6 months later when Leah's come back, but she's like changed and wrong and everything, and like it kind of presents itself as like it's gonna be like sci-fi, like oh my god, like is she a evil, like honestly I kind of was like, is she like turning into a mermaid? Like what is going on like first, and then it just very slowly starts to become clear that it is about love and marriage and loss and grief and all of that, and it absolutely wrecked me. Yeah, I pulled some like favorite quotes because I just feel like I can't really talk about it, so I'm gonna let the quotes do it for me. But this is one of my favorites. I think Una says after a pause that the thing about losing someone isn't the loss, but the absence of afterwards. Do you know what I mean? The endlessness of that. She looks sideways at me and sniffs. My friends were sad. People who knew my sister were sad, but everyone moves on after a month. It's all they can manage. I don't mean they weren't sad. It's just that things keep going or something. I don't know. She rolls her shoulders, shakes her head. It's hard when you look up and realize that everyone's moved off and left you in that place by yourself. Like they've all gone and you're still there holding on to the person you're supposed to let go of. So yeah, amazing, worth the hype, but it's definitely very, very dark and intense. A lot of people say the ending is ambiguous, and I kind of get what they're saying, but I think in some ways they're using that word incorrectly. Like, what happens at the ending is factual, like that's what happens, but it's what happens. The ending isn't ambiguous, the middle is, like, I guess. But yeah, so good. Then I listened to the audiobook of Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell, and I gave that 4 stars. It's a nonfiction book about cults, but specifically about the language of cults, like the language they use to attract people and to keep people and everything, because it kind of deconstructs the idea of like, oh, people in cults are just brainwashed, and talks a lot more about the way language is used and how they prey on vulnerable people and everything. And it talks about obviously kind of a lot of the big cults like Heaven's Gate or Scientology or whatever, but then it also gets into like more like the Instagram wellness cults, or like the cult of Peloton, which is like, it's like, that's obviously fine or whatever, but and just kind of how even more like innocuous, like non-damaging, dangerous cults still like have a language that there is, and that language, when good, can be used to create community, but when bad, it can be used to create disasters like Jonestown and all of that. So it's really, really interesting, and I know the author has a podcast, and I kind of feel like I want to listen to that now. I find cults very fascinating. I proudly say that I almost joined a cult once. Didn't know it was a cult until after. But then I also listened to the audiobook of, I was driving a lot, I guess, this week, Thirst, 2,600 Miles to Home by Heather Anderson. I gave that like 3.75 stars on Storygraph. I don't really remember anymore. But basically, this follows, it's a memoir, but like a very specific memoir. It follows Heather Anderson as she hikes the Pacific Crest Trail. And if you don't know what the Pacific Crest Trail is, I suggest reading Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Amazing. One of my favorite books of all time. But it is basically a 2,600 mile trail along the coast of California up through like Washington and Oregon to the border of Mexico to the border of Canada. And every year people hike it, and it usually takes most people like 4 to 6 months to hike that. Sometimes a little longer, sometimes shorter, you know. And Heather Anderson, whose trail name is Anish, which is like a big thing. She hiked that, I think she said in 2008, and then she's also hiked the Appalachian Trail along the east coast of the US, and the Continental Divide Trail, which is like New Mexico up to Canada, kind of, and so, which is like the Triple Crown. But in this book, she's telling the story of when she decided to try and get the fastest known time on the PCT, which is like 60 days, which is insane. And like the crazy thing about that is like you have to start later in the season in order for there not to be snow on the mountains, because you'll reach the mountains faster. But that means that you're in the desert of Southern California in like June and July instead of March and April. It's this whole thing. But anyway, so those are like the facts of what the book is about. But really it is about kind of the perseverance and the inner strength that it takes to actually do this. And it's about the beauty of nature. And a lot of it is about how she, when she's living like a normal life, the life she's supposed to live when she was with her husband, and working like a 9-to-5, that she just never felt satisfied. She had this like restlessness in her, and the only place she feels free and like herself and less anxious and all that is when she's in the woods. And so it's kind of about that, and about what it feels like to kind of feel at peace in a place that is kind of deadly if you're not careful. And yeah, I just thought it was really good. I've read a lot and consumed a lot of content about the Pacific Crest Trail, ADHD, but and this was a really good one. But there were like weird flashbacks to like her childhood that I didn't really feel like were relevant. Like, I guess it was relevant that she was like a fat kid or whatever, and now she's not, but I didn't really feel like there was like, I don't think she weaved it together great. She's definitely like not a writer, but I thought it was really like well done, and the story was told really well. Then I read the 2 books that I did a reading vlog on for kind of like Valentine's Day. The Bride Test by Helen Hoang was the first one, which I gave 4 stars. I talked about it in that video, and I don't want to get into it a ton more, but obviously many people, I'm sure, watch wrap-ups without watching vlogs. So I will do a quick little summary. It follows Kai and Esme, and it's kind of like an arranged marriage thing. It's one of the it's like the sequel to the Kiss Quotient, and follow-up is like the Heart Principle. But Kai is autistic, and he basically is like in his late 20s, and his mom is like, you need to get married. And they are Vietnamese. So she goes to Vietnam and finds this woman and brings her to Kai, and is like, you guys are gonna live together, and at the end of the summer you're gonna get married. Or she's gonna go back to Vietnam. And Esme is basically, so it's so much about like the immigrant experience, but it's also about like Esme doesn't really understand like what autism is really, but I just love the way that like Kai kind of communicates his needs with her, like what he needs from her, and she's really good at like adapting to that. So it's like without even really understanding what autism is, she is able to give him what he needs, and I feel like that is just really cool. Like this idea, like you don't need to understand what your partner is going through necessarily, like in their brain, in order to understand and do what they need you to do. And I just thought it was really nice. I just thought it was like really sweet, and I loved them. I loved Esme especially. Yeah, and I definitely want to get like the 1st and the 3rd book and read more. And then Slippery Creatures by KJ Charles I also gave 4 stars. It is a historical romance with kind of like a mystery, espionage, crime plot going on. It takes place after World War I in London, and follows Will Darling, who basically he just like is unemployed, and his uncle, like I think it's his uncle, like leaves him like his bookstore, and he just wants to like clean up that bookstore and like do his thing and all that kind of stuff. Like he's just kind of disillusioned by everything after the World War I and all that. And then he ends up getting sucked into this absolute insanity involving like the War Office and like anarchists, communist people, and like a formula from the for like a pandemic that his like uncle's friends had or something. craziness ensues. There's also a romance with this guy Kim, who is like, he's like a nobleman kind of guy, like a lower, he's part of the gentry of some form, very rich, and he's got a lot of secrets. The women in it are amazing. The romance was definitely, I think, kind of like the back burner thing. Like I thought it was going to be like the forefront was the romance, but it's kind of the like mystery plot is the forefront, and then the romance is kind of in the back. So I'm kind of interested to see like in the sequels the romance kind of come to the front a little bit more. So that will be fun, and I really loved it, and I really loved her writing, so I'm definitely excited to read more from her. The next book was an audiobook through Libby. It's a Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which I gave 4.5 stars. You know, it's great, but it just like, I don't know, novellas are hard sometimes, like short books, like the audiobook was 4 hours, you know, but it's like, it follows Dex, who is a non-binary tea monk on this world, I think it's called Panga. And ends up meeting this robot named Mosscap, because there used to, a couple hundred years ago, there were like robots in the cities like doing stuff for the humans, and then they kind of, I guess, became like sentient and are kind of like, we don't want to like do your work anymore. And the humans were like, all right. So the robots moved into the woods, they get the woods. So the story is basically just following kind of all these conversations and the relationship between Dex and Mosscap, and it's a lot of talk about like humanity and life and purpose and wilderness and nature and all of that. And yeah, it just kind of felt like getting like a hug or something, like, and I'm definitely want to get the next one, but for some reason my library doesn't have it either as like an audiobook or a physical book like on Libby, so I'm gonna have to see if I can get it through like an interlibrary loan or something, because it's like a duology and I want to take another 4 hours and read the next one, like come on. And then I guess the last real book that wasn't just little stories I read this month was the audiobook for Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which I gave 5 stars. I was so excited because like I was kind of nervous, because after not liking Death on the Nile, which I feel like is one of her other big Poirot mysteries, I was like, oh no, is this one also overhyped? Am I gonna solve it in 10 minutes again? No, absolutely not. Loved it, beyond worth the hype. So good, so good. It's, I mean, what it is in the title. There's a murder on the Orient Express. You get the idea. But basically it also like, then the train ends up getting snowed in somewhere in, I think they're in like Hungary or Yugoslavia, which is not a place anymore, but you know, where it was in the 30s. And like Poirot has to figure out what happens, and he basically has like one day to figure it out before like the authorities come in and get involved and screw it up the way the police always do, I guess. But so yeah, so the whole book is basically kind of like interviews with all the passengers who are all kind of suspects, because it could only be people on this specific train. And yeah, it's just really the twists and turns. It's, Christie is kind of known for using kind of some stock character types, and I feel like these are like the perfect versions of those type of characters, like the obnoxious American woman, the like aristocratic old lady, like the British army guy who hates everybody, like the, but yeah, so I really loved it. And I don't know, I don't know how I've never gotten spoiled for what happens in the Murder on the Orient Express, but I didn't, and I was shocked. So I absolutely recommend it. I think that if you've gotten spoiled, it's probably like, you know, like if you've seen the movie or whatever, I would still say that the book is probably better, because it usually is, but obviously you won't be as shocked by all the twists. So, but if you haven't seen the movie or been spoiled, I would definitely recommend this. I think it is maybe not like the best first Christie. I still think that And Then There Were None might be that, but I do think that it might be a really good introduction to Poirot. So yeah, that is what I read in February. Let me know if you have read any of those, and what you thought. Yeah, I don't think March is going to be quite as good because I have been in a bit of a reading slump for the last couple days. Haven't finished anything. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If I'm not around as much, you know, I mean, I'm barely around now, but in March it is because I'm dealing with personal shit. So thank you for giving me a place to film a little thing where I can be distracted for 30 minutes. Bye.